Hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. In this episode, I'm chatting with Nikhil Venkatesa. Nikhil is the content marketing lead at Convictional, a SaaS platform that enables B2B trade between suppliers and retailers. Before that, he worked at Animals as a content marketing manager. In this conversation, we talked about the intricacies of running a content marketing program as a one-person team and how that differs from the commonly given advice from thought leaders who typically come from larger company perspectives. We talk about why scrappiness is underrated and how to run content and channel experiments. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Nikhil Venkatesa.
My point of view comes from, as a content team of one in an economic downturn, right? Like, how should you think about content right now? I feel like that point of view is under discussed. I feel like it's easy to say, it's easy to talk about content strategy when you have all the resources, when you work at Shopify or HubSpot or CXL and all these places that have the playbook, and it's kind of easier to do that. But what do you do when you're at a very early stage startup, the marketing team is super lean, you're the only content marketer? How should you think about approaching the work you're doing? I feel like that's the unique point of view that I can bring to the table. And to that effect, I have things that I can talk about, going one level deeper is one mental model I've thought about that relates to this is content marketers, when you're a team of one, need to be like Swiss Army knives versus swords. So you need to be exceptional at multiple channels and not just rely on only one, because that is essential to sort of creating a conversation in your niche and setting yourself up for the long term. So the risk of only focusing on one channel, like a blog, as an early stage startup team of one, is that you run the risk of not appealing to your customers very early on when you need to have multiple touch points that you can engage with them on. So I learned this when we've recently started a newsletter, and we found that there are prospects who actually want to engage with our content that don't come in through the blog. They want to sit on the newsletter, they want to read multiple issues, and then they might enter a sales conversation with us. And then experimenting with things like podcasts, right? And knowing that they might not work, but just doing them anyway. So I think that sort of framework of being a Swiss Army knife and having these different tools and testing them out constantly is something that I don't feel like content marketers are keeping in mind right now. I feel like content marketing has is most associated with blog content, just because that's the type of stuff that people are talking about most. And I feel as an early stage startup, you should prioritize not just the blog, but having multiple different touch points. And the other thing is that, as a content team of one, I handle social as well. And so social needs to be just much more, you need to be much more familiar with it, because it's less likely that your startup is going to hire a social media manager or going to hire an external social media agency, right? So having those different skills and being familiar in those different ways, and having the confidence and being comfortable with the ambiguity is, I think those are skills that you need to be prepared for if you want to sort of ride this down market and actually want to be employed in-house at a early stage startup. Because based on the layoffs we're seeing, right, it's usually the editors, the freelance writers, the content writers, those are the guys in a content team that are going to be cut. But the Swiss Army knives, the guys who can bring so much added value to the table, are the guys who are most likely to stay, because it's a bigger risk for the company if you lose them.
The Swiss Army knife concept is interesting. Have you seen people complain about this? I've seen on Twitter and LinkedIn people saying hey, you're looking to hire a content marketer, not a, and then they'll list 10 other jobs where it's social, podcast, all these different things. But that's true if you're at HubSpot or something like that. But in my mind, when I was at CXL, I was all those things.
Yeah.
Because the goal was not necessarily to write blog posts. The goal was to grow the business.
Yep.
So it's basically I had the tools at my disposal to do that, and I could experiment with different channels. And I never felt like I was being stretched beyond I didn't look at it as this is in my job description, therefore this is all that I do. So how would you push back against the people who were complaining about that? Oh, you were hired for this, but now you're expected to do all these different things. Or is that just a startup necessity?
Yeah. So the people who are usually having that conversation are also the people who talk about work-life balance, who talk about who talk about like setting boundaries between your work and your personal life, and that's all well and good, but the reality is like startup life is hard. It's super difficult to generate traction when you're an early stage company, and especially like in the space that we're playing in, we're like creating a category within retail tech. So we're basically educating our audience. We're like educating different personas within those retail teams, and so as a result, there's a lot that needs to get done, right? And so as an early stage startup, you just need to like play with the resources you have. And especially like in a down market, you're not going to add headcount to the marketing team and a content marketing team. You're going to be very judicious about where you allocate those resources. And so the way I would think about it when people say, okay, like you have like a bunch of different roles within the content marketing job and you should hire like individual people for that, I would say, yeah, that's an ideal situation, right? But how many companies are actually going to go down that path? And if it's going to be just like a small percentage of them that actually do, then you need to be prepared for the majority of cases where that's not actually going to be the case. And you need to be realistic about, all right, this is the situation. And so you need to be smart about setting up processes and being honest with your team about how much bandwidth you actually have. I think one of the things that I've learned like during my time here is we have people internally who help with writing the thought leadership pieces, who help with creating the content. It's not just me. And so as a result, like we are able to create high quality content that doesn't require me to reach out to the best freelance writer and wait, right? We can just like our CEO is writing stuff, our COO is writing stuff, and that's the kind of scrappy nature that's the mindset you got to have at an early stage startup, because that's essentially like how you make do with slicing the pie in that sense.
That attitude of scrappiness, I feel like, has been underrated in the last couple of years. And I think that's probably a product of like inflated markets and just like a little bit of cushiony aspect to our work-life balance. But I remember when I started out my career, I joined this company called Lawn Starter, and they raised capital basically because like they hinged on the fact that their team was the scrappiest team of all time. And they totally were. Like everything we would do, it was like, how can we do this creatively? How can we do this without spending a bunch of capital? How can we accomplish this or at least test this channel without hiring a bunch of people before we actually prove it out? And I feel like I've brought that model of scrappiness through my career, albeit like when I was at HubSpot and Workato, like they didn't treat their company like that. So I do think it is something that you see a lot at the earlier stages because it's more of a survival mechanism. If you're not scrappy, if you hire a full-time employee for each of those positions, you're going to run out of money, and then none of you are going to have positions at the end of that.
Exactly. And I think, it also comes down to exactly what you said about testing the channel before you hire the person, right? Because, you can learn so much just from putting that MVP out there, which is what we're finding like with our podcast, with our newsletter, which are things that, we've produced on an extremely scrappy level. But just having those touch points and engaging with the audience in those different ways gives you so much more sort of like visibility into what people actually like resonate with and what they're actually looking for. And then that gives you more information to hire the right person for the role, right? And like you want to be hiring people who don't just fulfill the dimensions of the role, but can essentially like exponentially like add value to the table, right? Like you don't want someone to just like do one thing, because at a startup, everyone's wearing multiple hats. So you want to make sure that that person has the skills necessary to basically like take that role and basically expand it, grow it into something else beyond what you intend, right? And so doing those like initial tests are extremely important for hiring the right people.
Something I've thought a lot about and something that you've treaded in this conversation already is that you're maybe not necessarily paid a lot because you're good at your skill set. I mean, I'm sure that helps, but you're paid a lot on the extent to which you're not replaceable, right? And I would say that for myself, most of my individual skills, I'm pretty replaceable. Like I think I was always good at experimentation, but other people can do experimentation. I think like I have a unique voice, but like other people could write my blog posts. But like now, if I like bring out like a meta skill, I got very good at doing that testing of channels and basically coming up with new ideas and scaling something from 0 to 1 and building a playbook and then being able to identify talent to like basically take that over. That was what I did at HubSpot. That's what I'm doing at the company is basically like trying to figure things out on a sales model, on a marketing model, and then try to build a playbook. And, if you can automate it, if you can outsource it, if you can hire somebody else. But like, I think that meta skill is much harder to replace than like any specific skill that I'm kind of building up.
Yeah, agreed. And that's actually like that ties into how we think about like our culture is extremely like async. Like we're a fully like distributed company. And something that we prioritize is like learning and reflection for everything that we do. So like we've got we've got like company-wide protocols in place to make sure that everything is documented. We like, obviously use Loom and things like that. But I think that sort of reflection is necessary to build that meta skill, right? Like having the strength to look at, okay, if an experiment doesn't go well, why isn't it going well? Troubleshooting like the gaps, and then like actually like asking the team for help to basically resource into that, right? So for example, like during the first quarter I was here, like I was writing most of the content, so that like that constricted how much I was able to do outside the blog. And so I pointed this out to the team, being like, hey, like if we want to have a larger surface area across different content channels, you need to give me the budget to get freelancers and produce the top of funnel stuff, so that leaves me to produce like the more bottom of funnel, more like stuff that is closer to the customer in that sense. So I basically like made the case and was able to get the budget. And so having the ability to point out like where you're feeling constricted, where you need more resources, and doing that in a way that leadership buys in, that ties into that meta skill. Because if you can convince your team or leadership to give you the resources you need, you'll essentially like be confined to a limited space.
It seems like you've got a very fluid approach to content marketing strategy. You don't necessarily say like you have to do SEO content. Before we started, you were talking about how people overrate the prominence of blogs in the content marketing portfolio, and maybe other things should be looked at. But would you say, I mean, a lot of people come in and they're like, hey, you have to create demand, you have to be thought leadership, you have to be like leading the conversation. Other people are like, no, like harvest demand, do SEO. Some people are like, links don't matter. Some people, all they care about is links. Would you say you have any like strong convictions there, or is it more so like what fits the bill, what fits the purpose?
We can actually talk about backlinks a bit, because I noticed on Twitter that who was it? Yeah, Tina at Alloy was talking about how like backlinks are super overrated, and I think you jumped in the chat replying like at HubSpot.
Definitely work.
Yeah, so I think that there's some nuance to this, and I can actually speak with the experience that I've had like in the limited time I've been at Convictional. So I think that when it comes to backlinks, like getting from a DR and getting extremely tactical here, but getting from a DR of like 0 to 50 is actually pretty easy from a backlink perspective. And the ways that you can do that, like in an extremely scrappy way, are taking in inbound link opportunities. So using Haro, like help a B2B writer, and leveraging the team's expertise to do that. Doing partnerships, so blog swaps, like reaching out to your partners for like co-marketing opportunities. That's an easy way. Funding rounds help, right? Because you get that free PR for a funding round opportunity. So getting to like 50 from a backlink perspective is super easy. And once you get there, I think that there's a diminishing value to like constantly backlinking when you're a content team of one. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that, if you look at our Ahrefs, like how our content is performing, we're actually ranking for like plenty of keywords on page one that are sometimes like quite competitive to rank for. And so what we prioritize is like just the quality of content and making sure that we're actually like offering the most comprehensive content like within each article. And we don't worry as much about like getting those external backlinks, because we're seeing it perform, right? So I think that so once you get to a certain level of DR, like there's a diminishing value of returns. And if you choose to be the leader in like SEO content, and like constantly like you need to grow the blog and grow the organic traffic there, if that is what your business requires, then yes, external backlinks matter. But if, for example, for us, like the organic traffic is great, but there's a gap that we recognize that it's not actually leading to sales conversations right now. But the reason why the way we think about approaching organic content or organic search traffic right now is like occupying mindshare. So like making sure that if our competition is like speaking about something, making sure that we're outperforming them in the quality of content, making sure that we have a space and we have a place to play, and knowing that SEO takes time and etc. But understanding that you need to constrain your resources so that you're not over investing in a place where that sales are not going to come from that. So that's how we think about it, where it's like, we're ranking for things, but we're not going to spend money on an SEO agency to go get us backlinks, because that's not where the sales are coming from, right? So just being judicious about how you use backlinks, and like knowing like, so for example, like I still do the inbound stuff where if there's an opportunity to get a high DR backlink, that isn't like super related to retail tech, I'll still take it because yeah, over time I'm fine like growing that. But I'm not gonna go out of my way to spend my time and energy like pursuing backlink opportunities, doing a bunch of like backlink PR, things like that.
Well, yeah, you're speaking my language now with the diminishing marginal utility of actions too, because I don't think a lot of people think about like, all right, if something's good, it can also mean that it's not going to be as good if you do 10 of it versus like one of it or two of it. And I think that's the case with at least manual backlink building. But I would argue that the shift changes in terms of how you get the links. Like from 0 to 50, you're doing a lot of it manually because nobody knows who you are and you don't have search presence. And you probably don't have a big email list or anything to launch to. And then when you flip the switch, once you've got an email list of 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 people, once you can rank content much more easily for competitive terms, then I think you switch to passive link acquisition. And that's when you can like factor that into your content playbook and say like, all right, this keyword that's very high traffic and high, like low intent, something like for us, what is content marketing or content marketing definition? Nobody's going to buy our agency. Nobody's going to sign up, and buy products based on that. But if we can rank for that, then people are going to cite that. It's going to be definitional in all the content that people write about content marketing. And you can start to pick up passive link opportunities, but there's no way you're going to get to that point without doing the manual link building first. And then you can also do much more of the research stuff. You can, fund bigger like infographic type things that previously like people, simply wouldn't have cared about, like when you're at 10, 20, 30 domain rating. So I think the tactics change over time. The value of links I've seen is still important depending on a couple of factors. One is the space that you're in. So if you're in MarTech, like it's probably still beneficial to get links, even if you're at Unbound's, HubSpot, like that kind of stature. And two, the type of content, and both of those kind of factor into each other. So you see affiliate sites like Adam Onfroy is probably still doing a ton of link building for his stuff because it's so cutthroat and competitive to rank for, best CMS software or something like that. But yeah, so if we're at HubSpot, like when I was at HubSpot, like we would still do manual link building to pieces that were hard to link to. So nobody's going to go out of their way to link to a product listicle that features HubSpot at number one, but those things are actually going to be business valuable to us. And because the space is so crowded and competitive, because other affiliate people know that they can get that ranked and make money from it, because G2 is going after it, because there's so many like high domain rating sites that it just raises that barrier to entry and like keeps us on the defensive. So in some cases, I've seen it still be beneficial for manual link building. But yeah, if you're in a space where that's not the case and you're spending a ton of time link building and trying to do the haro stuff as opposed to just creating content and printing money, then it's an opportunity cost, I would say.
Yeah, I think what we're getting at is like the different natures of the industries we've been working in, and sort of like how like demand gen happens through inbound content, right? So I feel like especially like thinking about the productivity space, the MarTech space, anything where you've got like a low sort of like ACV and you've got like a self-serve trial option, right? Even in HubSpot's case, right, the basic plan is like something where that I'm sure the inbound engine is like driving those trials, driving those signups to at least try out the product. And in that case, I feel like it's extremely valuable to build backlinks, grow, like basically like be super competitive about it. But in our case, like we have a super high ACV, we appeal to enterprise retailers, we have a longer sales cycle because there's a lot of qualification that happens. And so in that case, it's like we're not expecting the C-suite to like come in through a blog article and sign up for a sales conversation through that. What we are expecting is like on the flip side of that, we've got a lot of brands who sign up on our platform to connect with retailers, and for them it's free to sign up. And so a lot of our organic content is aimed at like answering their questions, getting them to sign up, and getting sort of like just free traffic coming in and free conversions into the platform, so that we've got like more brands on Convictional versus like having to like go and outbound those brands.
Do you want to explain real quickly what Convictional does, and also what drove you to work there? That'd be interesting as well.
Yeah. Do you want me to do this as like, do you want to ask a question about my story, and then I can like give the whole spiel, and then that leads me to like what Convictional is, or do you want like a separate explanation?
Yeah, totally. Also, right. Just touch on this. I'm not going to edit any of this out, by the way. This is all fascinating. Before you joined Animals, I saw you had 2 roles in Madison, Wisconsin. Did you live there, or did you visit there? Or?
I lived there for a year. So I lived there for 1 year, worked at early stage startups there. Extremely different experience than what I'm going through at Convictional, because that was pre-product market fit. So a lot of the marketing stuff we were doing there was like, just like, praying to God that it'll work. But yeah, so I'll give you the spiel on just my background, very short. I've been a marketing generalist since about like 2018, 2019. Was doing like freelance journalism, podcast stuff, and then pivoted to marketing, I should say, in 2020. Great time to get into marketing with COVID hitting. Worked at a couple of early stage startups, and then essentially like found the opportunity in content when I joined Animals in 2021. Spent close to a year at Animals, and worked with some pretty high profile customers, including like Notion, Spotify, a bit of Klaviyo. Extremely like valuable experience, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the ex Animals folks who were there and current folks as well. Left Animals in 2021 to late 2021 to join Convictional. So it's been about 7 months since I started there. So why did I join Convictional? You can just search for my name, nikhilvenkatesa.com. There's like a blog post I wrote like when I initially joined. But essentially, it was one of those. It's one of those companies that when you meet the team and you see the opportunity, it gets you really fired up, and you can see sort of the scale of the problem they're trying to solve. So, in Convictional's case, they want to automate B2B trade. The way that businesses and suppliers interact is still extremely outdated. If Tesla wants to buy aluminium, they do it on an extremely outdated data protocol called EDI, Electronic Data Interchange. It's used across a wide number of industries.
And sorry, is this all for B2B or is this for B2C as well? Like if you're a supplement manufacturer and like you're coordinating with companies in China to pick up like raw ashwagandha or something like that, is it also for that case or is it more for just the B2B kind of like supply chain?
We're starting with the B2B supply chain, but the use case you just spoke about where a brand wants to buy ashwagandha from a manufacturer, it could be happening on EDI for all we know, right? We just haven't gotten there yet. Right now, the use case that our founders, found a wedge into was like retailers take about 3 to 4 months to add new brands to their stores, for like even for drop shipping, right? And so the reason why is because EDI takes about 3 months to test and implement for each additional brand. And so Convictional essentially cuts that time down to about like 15 hours right now if you have one of our native integrations on Shopify, BigCommerce, or WooCommerce. And so the two founders, they come from Shopify. A lot of the early team came from Shopify. So that was another value add to me, where it was like, high quality talent who like has been in that high growth experience before. And then we've got the investment to essentially like give us the resources we need to figure it out and grow the business. So they did a Series A. They went through Y Combinator in 2019. Another good signal for me. Series A was in 2021, and then we announced Series B early 2022. So from like a talent standpoint, from a problem like solution standpoint and industry space, because it's something that people haven't heard about. It's not extremely competitive. It's something that's the category creation we're going after. And because we've got the funding and the resources, like that cumulative, like those reasons were why I joined Convictional.
And before you joined, had they already built out any content marketing foundations, or was this all built from scratch from the time that you joined and onwards?
So they had a marketing generalist similar to what I'd done in the past, who was like involved in across a whole bunch of areas, including, and they have a strong conviction, pun intended, in content. So they, our founders were writing on the company blog from like the time they started. So that actually helped us, on the domain side, because obviously like it takes time to build that up. And so they did have some blogs that were ranking. But there was a mismatch of intent and sort of like the kind of content that was being produced. So we were getting a lot of traffic for the wrong articles, and the types of traffic we were getting were not like in line with the kind of companies that we wanted to actually like appeal to and get traffic from. So with regards to the blog, there was an existing presence, but taking that over and then adding newsletter, podcasts, really running social was a place where they didn't really have much of a presence. And so like actually building a LinkedIn following is something that I've also been involved with during my time there.
Were there experiments that it sounded like podcast, newsletter, LinkedIn, they were all successful. Were there experiments that you tried but didn't work?
I would say that with the podcast and newsletter, it's still super early. Like the newsletter we launched like just last month, and we're running that on a bi-weekly cycle, and we're being like slow and intentional about it. And so the podcast as well, like episode 2 is dropping tomorrow, right? So these are experiments that are ongoing. They're not, I can't say whether they've succeeded or failed. And so it'll be interesting to see how they play out. I think from the biggest success so far has been on the SEO side, which is where most of my attention was coming in, because I had to basically prove that I could do the job, like basically get leadership buy-in that way. And so essentially, like in one quarter, we doubled our domain rating from about like 27 to 49 to 47 right now, almost doubling it. And then we also started ranking for actual terms that we wanted to be ranking for. So, for example, like virtual inventory, which is a space we play in, EDI specific terms, which are like low competition, but like have enough long tail volume. And that's where like we want to see some traffic coming in as well. Dropship versus marketplace, right? These sort of supply models where we need to have like content out there, because that's something like if a retailer is like deciding between implementing a dropship program versus a marketplace and they want to know the difference, it's likely they'll find our article and they'll basically buy into how we see the world and our point of view. So that's where the biggest success has been so far, just because it's really early days. It's only been like 6 months since I joined. And that's like quantitative proof that, on the SEO side, things have been working.
Cool. I have more questions about what you're currently doing, but I want to ask before we get too far ahead about your time at Animals, and if you have any lessons that you remember learning that maybe most content marketers don't get access to. Like, that's a high-powered machine working with pretty large companies and a different sphere than a lot of people get used to working with. So what did you learn about content marketing from Animals?
I think that it's useful for content marketers to work at an agency early on. It's probably the most efficient way to learn content marketing and the basics of content marketing, the fundamentals, like right in front of you. And so that was pretty helpful. I think where it's not so helpful is when you want to up-level your skills from being a pure writer who can get things to rank to being an actual content marketer who like thinks about not just an article, but thinks about, okay, like, how is this going to tie into the upcoming newsletter issue, to a podcast episode? How am I going to repurpose that piece of content for social, right? Taking sort of like a more holistic approach to content marketing than just this atomic piece of content. I think that's where the agency model didn't really help me. The other thing I'll say is that, and this is something that we discussed as well, is that, I am not fully bought in on the value of agencies for content marketing. And so that was informed by my time at Animals, where I felt like, businesses would come to the agency for, solving a very specific need when it came to business revenue. And there's only so much you can do as an agency when you don't have full visibility into their marketing operations, into how they're actually like taking that content that you're generating and applying it to touch points that can add value to their customers or bring in like more traffic and conversion, right? So I think we didn't really focus on conversion. We focused more on top of funnel traffic. And I feel like that's well and good. But, as a marketer, you need to be aware of how is that actually tying into conversions and actual like sales conversations. Yeah, and I feel like, in an inflated market, agencies are great, right? They're able to, charge a premium for the service that they offer. But I think in a down market, those vendors and those agencies like can usually find it difficult, because businesses, their clients need to be more sort of judicious about where they spend their dollars. And so like as an agency, you need to be really you need to show your value, right, on a regular basis, and you need to show how the content you're generating is actually leading to those returns for the business, because otherwise it's easy for the business to say, yeah, like we can do this in-house and we can figure this out ourselves.
So if I presented you a hypothetical agency that may actually map our strategies and production to business goals, how would that change your level of skepticism?
I think it would be, I'd definitely give it a shot. But the issue is that because it's a long game, that, if you sign up for an agency that is giving you a promise upfront, there's like high volatility and high variability on when those results will show up and how those results show up for you. And I think businesses that set themselves up for the long term need to figure this out in-house versus like putting the problem externally and, basically like giving the know-how to an agency versus like building that in-house. I think that a good model that can work for businesses is like their in-house team works with the agency for a bit, takes the best learnings, and then applies it in-house at a more like cost-effective way.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
and I know this might not be the best thing to hear, because I know you're running an agency, and the value proposition is obvious for you, right? So
well, it's so you're touching on something that I think like there's clients that don't match that. There's bad fit clients, and I think like we talked about this earlier, but if you're an early stage founder looking to like test your acquisition channels, an agency is not the best bet. I think you have to be convictional. You have to have high conviction that content marketing is the channel that's going to work for you, whether you have past experience or at least a very good hypothesis or some groundwork laid out. Because otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to work in the first 2 or 3 months in the way that you want it to. And like you as a founder or a general leader, like if you're a VP or something and you're spending time editing the content that an agency is producing, that's just not the best use of your time. And I think that's going to go away. But I have seen very good fits. I think a good fit client for us is typically when somebody in-house knows what the hell they're talking about with content. They don't have to be an actual subject matter expert, like down to the level where they're doing content gap analysis and whatever else in Ahrefs, but they need to understand like a good amount of how content looks when it works. And that also precludes somebody being in-house, like, and having that ownership stake. So they're typically going to be the gatekeeper, the translator of the company strategy, and that bridge forms between us and them. And we can basically build a content strategy that maps to their business strategy. So having that in-house helps a lot. And a lot of people look at agencies, or they should look at agencies as maybe training wheels or foundation building or framework building. Because like you said, I think anybody who is serious about content or any channel is eventually going to in-house a significant portion of at least the strategy component. And then some of those companies actually end up working with us for the long term because they want that augmented capacity in terms of promotion and production and stuff like that. But there's certainly a lot of people who think like, I should do content marketing. I don't know how to do it. I don't know what it looks like, but yeah, let me pay a bunch of money for an agency to come figure this out. And then they get a bunch of keywords that don't map to their actual strategy, and they wonder why it doesn't work.
The way I like to think about it, just based on what you've told me, is like, if you think of an agency as like a sniper who like accomplishes a very specific job for you, then you'll be much more satisfied with the results that they give you. So this could be, for example, like a digital PR content agency who creates those specific things to get you those like passive links, right? That could be an example. Another one could be, it's a technical SEO content agency that audits your, like, maybe you've reached the point where you've published hundreds of articles. You need someone to come in with that technical mindset and basically like offer something that your in-house content resource can't accomplish for you, right? And doing that on a fixed time frame. So in those specific cases, I think agencies can be super valuable and add value add there. But I think if you're an early stage company that is early on in their content journey, having an agency is basically like pushing the problem on them versus like actually like taking the time to figure out like, and actually solve the problem.
Well, it depends how early stage, but I do think earlier stage too, you benefit from somebody with skin in the game and deep domain expertise. Even if like you're new at Convictional, but you're going to develop some deeper level of expertise than we can do so at an agency level. That's just a fact of nature. Yeah. And I think that when you're building things out, you need that back of the hand knowledge of your space, your customers, what's going right, what's going wrong, how much money, how much runway you have. Like it's like all of those factors come in, whereas agencies are going to have that very particular angle. So that kind of leads to your point on like the one person content shop too. And like that person being like a pivotal kind of generalist that can go in and make those assumptions, that can go in and run those experiments and kind of build things out from the ground up.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think that, being at an agency was good because it helped like create that level of pace and level of, performance from just an execution standpoint. But it was also, I feel like, not having that full visibility across like multiple content touch points and, the internal marketing engine was like, I think that was the biggest gap that I saw. And that's why I wanted to move in-house as well.
Do you think that changes based on the business model? Like if you're an agency working with, say, e-commerce companies where it's a very simple sale and like you can map those things back, or even a freemium model like HubSpot has, do you think it's easier to have more of an inside view of the marketing machine, given that it's maybe a little bit less, there's less stages, like if you've got a high ACV, like multi-month, year-long sales process, it's going to be hard for anybody on the outside and even on the inside to see that. But do you think the model could vary based on, like your kind of agency fit?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I also think that, something that we noticed at Animals was that some of our best fit clients were brands were companies that had really strong brands, but had not made the investment in SEO up till that point. And so essentially when they came to us, they were essentially putting fuel on a fire that was already like pretty strong, right? And so in those cases, like agencies can really like be the step change that can like accelerate your growth from an inbound standpoint. But I think that, like you said, with a multi-month, like high ACV, early stage startup, it's really difficult to make the case to go to a content agency because attribution is a challenge, and your economic buyer is usually not the person who's going to be engaging with the content, and so just the steps to see whether the content is actually leading to those conversions is really challenging to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of people come in too early too. Like I think it was Grow and Convert. I think they said this. They were talking about like if it's not that you have to do paid advertising, but if you haven't found a way to convert cold traffic from paid ads, like you're probably not going to be able to have success with content marketing yet because you haven't found your message, you haven't found your product market fit in a certain way. Like if you're before that stage, like pouring more content marketing on is probably not going to solve the problems that you need to solve.
Exactly. And the other thing is that, when you're extremely early stage and when you're, in our case, when your ICP and your target personas are like super high up at the VP, at the C-suite level, you have to think about how do you build a relationship with them that is authentic and that, you actually get that feedback loop of what their challenges are and creating content that meets those challenges. One of the ways we're doing that is having like in-person small dinner events. We had our first one in New York last week, actually. And what that does is it like brings this community element into the game where you can have this sort of like back and forth feedback loop. You have these like high quality SMEs that can inform the content you're producing. And it's more of a relationship driven approach versus like, if you don't have that relationship, you run the risk of creating a whole bunch of content that doesn't appeal to anyone. And so I think that, that's one of the benefits of being like an in-house content marketer, like really focus on what's happening externally, is that you can basically take those inputs and actually build content that meets them.
Yeah, when I was at CXL, I used to go to 6 to 10 conferences a year, and I would just like, attend the talks and like talk to all the experts, and like I was in the space. Like it's something that you like an agency would never probably send somebody to all the conferences in a space, like if you're working with that type of a client, but like I was able to do that. And then I could find the new topics that people actually cared about that maybe didn't have search volume yet. And I think that was cool. That was unique. I get kind of how you would find those topics, but one thing I'm curious about is if you're having success with organic, podcast is a different story. I have no fucking idea how to attribute podcast success. But like, how do you gauge the efforts of your content marketing, given that it's a little bit longer of a sales cycle and more of a complex sales cycle?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The way we think about it is that we have different pieces of content that meet a particular goal for us. And so when it comes to just content on the blog, we've split that out into basically like 4 different types right now. We've got the thought leadership stuff, search stuff, problem solving, and brand. So in the case of brand, there's no like real success metric there. In the case of search, it's obvious ranking or organic search traffic. The interesting piece is when it comes to thought leadership and problem solving. In the case of problem solving, I essentially like listen to customer calls. I pull out questions. I create content that's targeted to answering those questions. And then we send it back to the prospect or the customer. And then if we get feedback that, hey, this was like super helpful and super useful to me, that achieves the success metric there. In the case of thought leadership, that's typically written by our CEO. We distribute that through the newsletter, which is mostly filled with current customers and prospects. And then we get feedback from them, whether that was like super helpful and interesting or not. So it's usually that qualitative approach. And yeah, those are the signals that tell us whether what we're doing is like valuable or not. Also like listening to the sales calls, like, we've got prospects who come in like after reading a bunch of blog posts, HubSpot and GA might not attribute it, but on the sales call, they'll say, hey, like, I read this piece, was super interesting. I'm thinking of starting like a dropship program or a marketplace program. And that's when you came to mind, right? So it's pretty much like a one-to-one basis. And that's typically how it is at an early stage startup.
Yeah. Well, and also like our agency, like I resonate with that. Like if 500 people listen to this episode, 500 people listen to a Kitchen Side podcast episode, and 500 people read a blog post, like that's all the same quantity of people being exposed to the content, but like there may be vastly different resonance when it comes to like, did this contribute to somebody reaching out to get on a sales call.
Exactly.
And those are the things that we tend to hear just purely qualitatively. I mean, maybe there's something we could do with HubSpot to try to track that back, but it's almost like more effort to do that than just asking somebody on a sales call, like, hey, how did you hear about us? And we hear the same piece of content a couple of times. We're like, we should do that more. We should definitely do that more.
Yeah, and it's also, we keep like in close contact with the sales team, and so if the sales team comes to us and say, "Hey, we're like hearing this constantly from prospects, like we don't have content that meets this. Can you create something?" Like that is the highest priority thing, because like that is what is actually happening in the business right now, versus like a keyword that could bring the traffic that we want. That's deprioritized.
So, as a one-person content shop, how are you spending most of your time? How is it broken down into strategy, creation, editorial, management, new experiments, the whole slew of things?
It's I wish there was like a more like well-defined process around it, but honestly, it's like in terms of what the needs of the business are. So like on a weekly basis, we aim to get at least 2 new blog posts on the site with like those defined goals. So like I mentioned before, we've got like top of funnel stuff that we assign to freelance writers. Those writers send me drafts. I edit them, obviously do the SEO stuff, design stuff, which is all the design stuff is outsourced. So then working with the designers to get the right designs and put it on the website. And then on the thought leadership side, working with internal teams to make sure that we're producing the thought leadership content that is going out in the newsletter. For the podcast, I'm working with another agency to repurpose the episodes into social clips, into things that we can host on the website. So working with them on that. So it's a lot of like, it's a lot of management across different teams and making sure that, each of those content channels is having the right content published at the right time. And then right now, we actually like had OKRs as part of like the company-wide sort of like tracking. We were actually like moving away from that to more of a management by missions approach, because we found that, and this is true of content as well, like OKRs lead to extremely short-term thinking, extremely like short-term decision-making. And so we were finding ourselves just like thinking about the next quarter versus about the next year or the next couple of years. And so, yeah, so one of the things I've been doing on the strategy side is just reorienting our content program and our content production around the mission. So aiming to produce like higher quality content, not like holding ourselves to lower standards, but actually like raising the standard. So making sure that we're actually speaking to SMEs outside the company, and producing like higher quality content that way. So yeah, it's a moving target right now. And so like just trying to amp it up in that sense.
What is the management by mission, you called it?
Yeah.
What is that framework, and how does that map down to your daily actions? It sounds like it's somewhat like high level, like you're like, this is what we want to accomplish mission wide.
Yeah. So so mission wide, just setting what's the top level mission for content as a function, and then under that, like having clear like 2 or 3 priorities that you're assigning like your experiments to, right? So if you're saying that, hey, like I want to see whether the podcast will lead to actual like, sales leads, right? That could be like a submission under the overall mission. Then like taking that experiment, documenting it, setting a time frame against it, and then executing against it. So you might have like experiments that have a shorter time horizon where it's like 8 weeks, for example, or you might have longer ones that take like 3 months or 6 months, right? And so like tracking those different projects against the relative timeframes is sort of how like management by missions work. Full disclosure, like I'm still like learning it myself. So if I've like misrepresented in any way, I'm sorry.
No, that's interesting. I'll have to look up some materials after this. That sounds fascinating. How do you manage everything? Like, you've got the agency for podcast stuff. You've got your writers on the top of the funnel side, your subject matter experts for the thought leadership stuff. Are you using Airtable, Notion? How are you keeping this all consolidated and like on a timely schedule or calendar?
Yeah, so the calendar, we've just got a Google Sheets to run that. And then we track like the progress of each piece of content on Asana. So we have a board for that. For the social posts, I just use a lightweight like Notion table just to like quickly create stuff and like post it out. I don't schedule it because HubSpot sucks at social scheduling. So yeah, as I'm sure you know, and so just doing it manually is what I found to be the best for us. Something that I've been learning on the organic social side is that using personal accounts to get content out there has like given us more value than just brand accounts. And so like I'll send posts to our co-founder being like, hey, like publish this on your account, and his executive assistant will post it on our behalf, and we'll see like much more traffic coming in from when he posted versus when the company account posts it. So yeah, it's a lot of just like scrappy like manual stuff. I wish it was like, I mean, I think that there's value to brute forcing it right now, but eventually like finding the right automations in the right like process is something that I definitely need to work on.
Do you do any of this like internal management for your own personal brand building stuff? Like I know you're on Twitter. Like I don't know if you're doing other kind of writing. Like do you proactively look at your own kind of personal brand building the same way?
I prefer to take like an ad hoc, like fun approach to my personal Twitter. Like I just have fun with it, and that's something that sort of like perspective is something I've carried over to Convictional as well, where it's like, one of the ways we position ourselves is like a helpful guide to our customers. But another way that we do that is by being super approachable and super fun to interact with, right? So like some of our competitors in the space are like these huge monolithic brands that speak in an extremely stuffy like tone of voice. And so the way that we approach it is like like the design of our website is much more intuitive. It's much more friendly to approach. And also like we talk in a way that, we don't like speak down to readers. We speak up to them, but we also like, it's stuff that you'd be fine with reading. And so like, like if your introduction is like starting with the definition, you've lost the reader, right? And so just like approaching our language in a very like approachable way is something that I've taken from my personal side into the business side.
It's amazing how much you can stand out by just being interesting and fun in certain spaces.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Like, and I think that's a benefit of just the space we're playing in, where there hasn't been too much innovation, and any innovation that's had is just by these legacy companies that like take an older approach to B2B marketing. And so the way we approach it is just being like as engaging as possible, so that like when people like come across our content across any of our channels, like they like really want to vibe with it, and they see value in the kind of stuff we're putting out.
I would assume that, or I would guess that most people and brands have more charisma than they allow themselves to show. Like I would imagine everybody has this potential to be interesting in their own footing, but like a lot of people are too risk averse, and they say like, no, we got to like clamp it down and come up with this middle ground, median, informal yet professional, whatever style guides are saying, that tone, and it squashes all personality and charisma out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And our CEO like makes puns all the time, and on his like personal LinkedIn, like he's like making puns and just like having jokes and just like having fun with it. And I think that more B2B brands need to have fun and just not be worried about like tying your tone of voice to like conversions and sales leads and all that stuff. Like if you are more approachable and just more engaging, like more people will vibe with your brand and associate you when the right time comes.
I find that very much energy or momentum or motivation, or there's some nebulous word for this, but like that is so important at an early stage. It's always important, right? Like how people feel about the work they're doing. The founders are naturally probably more motivated because it's their company. It's like their vision was involved. I'm sure they still have some days where it's like tiring, but like if you can get the team involved and everybody's having fun and enjoying the work they're doing, like I think that reads through the work. I think you can tell on the other side of that if somebody's passionate, if they're in it, if they want to be there, and I it's hard for me to like put a concrete like how to do that for a company. But with Omniscient, we have a principle. It's like, this should be fun. So everything we're doing, not everything's going to be super fun, right? Like we have to pay taxes and stuff like that too. But, if I'm spending too much time, or anybody on the team spending too much time on something that they're like, I hate this. This is so boring. It's draining my soul. Like that, it costs the time that it takes them to do that. But even more so, it costs them a little spirit. So then the next thing they do, they're going to have a little bit less joie de vivre, like there's going to be a little less of their personality in the next thing. So we try to keep that top of mind and say like, hey, if you're not having fun, how can we make this more fun? How can we put some more of you into this?
How often are you troubleshooting that, and how do you troubleshoot that?
We ask every Monday, we have an all hands meeting, like what people's energy levels are. So we get a gauge from like 0 to 100. And we borrowed this from Brene Brown. She talked about it on a Tim Ferriss podcast in relation to her partnership with her husband. And the idea is that not everybody's always going to be 100%, like, or, maybe not even like each of you are going to be 50-50. Like maybe some weeks somebody's going to be a 20 and the other person needs to take over some effort. Sometimes that's tiredness, just general. Sometimes that's overly busyness. But sometimes you hear it repeatedly come up because somebody's working on something that's just draining them. And that's when we can start to identify those things. And that's more of a proactive way. We also do it on one-on-ones. We have a weekly, I think it's called Poly. It's like this
it's a Teams bot or Slack bot. Yeah.
Exactly. It's kind of like 15-5 or something like that. So we take multiple like very quick polls. We don't do any like long surveys or anything like that to get the feedback. We just kind of like keep a temperature check at all times on what people are working on and where things are draining. And yeah, if it's something that's like sometimes sales prospecting and stuff drains me. So like there's ways that I can try to automate that, but sometimes I just have to like roll up my sleeves and do it. But if it's something that I can make more fun, like for instance, with sales prospecting, is there a way that I could like introduce some element of like creativity into it that would make it more interesting? Maybe that involves like creating Loom videos or trying out new tools that I find on Product Hunter, something like that. There's usually little ways that you can spice things up. Or like when I was at CXL and Chanel and I worked there together, we would always writing the content was fun because it was about experimentation, which I also worked in. But it's still tiring writing, 3,000 word post twice a week or something like that. So we would always put in like inside jokes because we would read each other's content and just try to make each other laugh when the other was editing it. And I think that kept us going pretty well as well. So I don't know if there's like a single one size fits all answer, but
yeah, for us, similar to you guys, we do temperature checks with Lattice. So the company runs on Lattice, and we have a thing called weekly updates, where at the end of the week, everyone across the company like shares what they spent their learning time doing. Because we've got like this thing called compound time, where we spend like 4 hours a week, like 5 hours a week, essentially like building a skill or learning something or reading a book that contributes to our performance. And then we also talk about what's the most important thing you accomplished this week, what's the biggest thing you're looking forward to next week, and then also the sentiment analysis. So like, how are you feeling with a smiley face scale, right? So that's extremely useful to seeing across the company how people are feeling. And we also do pulse surveys where the people team sends us like a bunch of like anonymized questions to see across the company how everyone is doing.
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, we want to incentivize creativity, scrappiness. We want people to be in full spirits. And if people are dejected week after week, like that's a problem. Even if they're working on really important things, like we're thinking for the long game. So in 6 months, like how are they going to be feeling? What ideas are going to be brewing in their brains now? Or what ideas are currently put on hold because they're, just depressed at like the boring work they're doing. So it's very important.
I think one thing with the long game that I definitely was thinking about before getting on this call was that I feel like too many content marketers in early stage companies mistake the duration of the game for how much intensity they need to put in.
Yes, 100%. Did you read that blog post that I wrote about that?
I did not.
I wrote a whole blog post. It was like, sure, content marketing is a long game, but it should be played fast or something like that. And people say
that's so true. That's so true
all the time. It's like, oh, it's a long game. Be patient. Like, oh, it'll come.
That's
eventually.
A mistake.
Like,
that's a mistake.
No, fuck that. Like, if you have high conviction, then go have some urgency, have some intensity, like amp it up.
Exactly. I don't know if you've read this book, Amp It Up by
yes.
Frank Slootman. Yeah. I read it extremely recently. It was given to us since the team is fully distributed, we meet twice a year for like an onsite. And so it was given as one of the books to pick up at the onsite. But I read it, and after I read it, I was operating just much more like at a higher level than I was prior to reading that book. And I think that's a book that every content marketer needs to read, just in terms of like basically putting on your startup cap and like putting on your startup hat. And that's how you need to perform, like at a level of intensity that is uncomfortable, that feels painful, but it's only when you're like pushing yourself to that limit can you see results that are uncommon in your industry.
Every time I've looked back in my career, the stages that I grew the most and was actually the most happy in retrospect was when I was amping it up. Like when like he's got the 3 principles. It's like narrow the focus, raise the bar of excellence, and then increase the intensity or urgency. And at every point that I had grown the most, it was when I was embodying those principles.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a contradiction, and this is an opposing point of view from the work-life balance like point of view that a lot of like people like are espousing these days, right? Where it's like, with remote work, you have the flexibility to balance work and life. But at the end of the day, like if you aren't amping it up in your work, then you're not going to see the kinds of results that you need to see at an early stage. And I feel like that's extremely important to keep in mind. And, you know, burnout is a challenge in a remote environment. And so you need to like just have your finger on the pulse of, you know, are you amping it up, or are you like doing a bunch of busy work that's draining your energy and isn't leading to results, right? Because it's very easy to conflate the two and to mistake one for the other.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I will say, I've mentioned this on Twitter before, but like the times that I've felt, I don't know what true burnout means. Like, I think there is a medical definition, but like the times that I felt most dejected, where I woke up in the morning, snoozed the alarm, and just didn't want to do anything, was when I was under challenged. Like, it was when, I mean, I was busy, like I was doing a bunch of meetings and stuff, but I simply wasn't, I didn't have the intensity of intellectual output. And that I actually got closer to burnout during those times. And I mean, obviously you can overdo it on the other end as well. Like, it's all about balance there, but like, yeah, people forget about that other side of the scale where it's like, you're actually not challenged, you're not interested, you're not mentally intrigued, and therefore you just lose interest. And
yeah, and also diagnosing like where that comes from, right? I had a similar experience just last week where I felt like I was working on like low impact work. I was like putting out a bunch of like social posts and things like that. And so I was like putting out stuff, but it wasn't the kind of stuff I wanted to be putting out, right? And so like diagnosing that. And so I found an article that I can share, we can put in the show notes, from Brie Wolfson on First Round Review, which is like, she was X Stripe, X Figma, but she was talking about like having like an ongoing stack rank that basically like gives you a real-time view of like, okay, like, are you actually working on the highest impact things that you need to be working on? And using that, sharing that with your manager, like having visibility into that, and using that as the tool to diagnose like where you're feeling under challenged, where you're feeling over challenged, and then prioritizing accordingly. I feel like as content marketers, I feel like we fall into this trap of like just looking at the next post, the next thing, and having this myopic view of the work we're doing, whereas we need to take a more like big picture view and actually like look at the scale of things we're doing and diagnosing accordingly.
100%. We're at time. I could talk to you for another hour, but let's talk about where to find you online and anything you want to promote or share.
Yeah, definitely. You can find me online on Twitter. So my handle is Re-Election Boy. I won't explain what that handle is. A younger version of me, like I think like 12 years ago, created that account. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn at Nikhil Venkatesa. And then if you want to stay in touch with Convictional's journey and sort of like seeing the kind of work we're putting out on the content side, yeah, just follow our different social handles. And yeah, happy to stay in touch.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Super fun.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this.